Thank you for joining IAB There.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to IAB There, our regular streaming show in which we connect the digital marketing ecosystem. I'm Brad Behrens, editor-in-chief here at the IAB. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I am thrilled to welcome back to the program Dave Grimaldi and Jeff Murray. They are the two gentlemen who lead our policy efforts in Washington, D.C. and throughout this fine land of ours. We're going to bring them onto the stream in a moment to talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill, what's happening in state houses throughout the country. We're gearing into the summer. We have a few short weeks until the August recess. Let's find out what's happening, what we are hoping will happen, and what we think probably is not going to happen. Let's bring them into the stream. Dave Grimaldi, Jeff Murray, welcome back to IAB There.
Excellent to be back, Brad. Thank you.
Good to be here, Brad.
Thank you both for coming. So let's dig in. We have just a few short weeks left in the session before an August break. What's happening in the Congress and the Senate? What has momentum? What do we wish had momentum, but just doesn't right now?
Dave, your
Jeff?
people are in charge. You want to take that one?
I'm happy we are in charge, Jeff. So just let's keep that as a running theme. Democrats here in blinking lights. And
Okay, tell us all you're about to accomplish.
for IAB there next year after November, Jeff is more than welcome to throw it right back at me should things switch. And goodness, there's a chance of that. Brad, I'll tell you, you'll recall Tim Russert on election night. In 2000, he said, Florida, Florida, Florida. He put it on the whiteboard about the Bush-Gore election, what it was going to come down to. Well, right now, if I had a whiteboard next to me, I would write infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. It is all the rage here inside the Beltway. It is the president's big signature achievement and package currently, along with some things he's doing on foreign relations. He's going overseas to Great Britain to meet with President Putin and the British Prime Minister. But right now, Senator Chuck Schumer, Senate Democratic leader from New York, has set an ambitious goal of moving a major infrastructure bill through the Senate by July. And that timeline, though, is a little tricky because in the next several weeks, not to get into too much Washington parlance, we could see the development of a budget resolution with instructions to committees to begin drafting a reconciliation package. And earlier this year, that took just 39 days from the time a budget resolution text was announced until the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law. That was a short period of Democratic unity. That doesn't really exist today. A couple moderate senators, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, a couple others are kind of stirring the pot a little bit. So there could be some calls for changes from members that could set up final passage in the fall. It would be, though, a little politically awkward for congressional leadership to start this big process and then pause a reconciliation process for the August recess. So we will see how that wends its way, but that's a big ticket item coming through Congress. Filibuster reform is another one. Everybody hears that word bandied about, and that's also going to kind of go into the political partisan mess mixing bowl. So we will see how that moves forward also. But there's never a dull moment here, although it is certainly quieter this year than it was last year at this time leading up to the Trump-Biden general election. There's a little more regular order. There's calmer press conferences, so on and so forth. But Joe Biden has his work cut out for him on a couple big packages.
So let me take a quick step back to reframe that for those of you who don't know, Dave is a Democrat and Jeff is a Republican. And so I always love the sort of point counterpoint spirited exchanges between them as these things come up. Joe Manchin, who you just mentioned, is the person who is signaled his antipathy towards filibuster reform, which is one of the things which I think is cementing his political power at the moment. But Jeff, both a counterpoint to you, and also I know that you cover the states quite a bit. I'd love to know if there's any parallel action or ennui on the state level right now.
Sure. It's funny that Dave said, Florida, 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 infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. I would say West Virginia, West Virginia, West Virginia. I mean, there is no dispute that Joe Manchin is one of the most powerful political figures in Washington right now. There's a wide variety of opinions as to whether that's a good or a bad thing. But from Republicans' perspective, it's been really helpful to kind of have him as a center of gravity that is pulling Biden and a lot of the Democratic Party away from more of a leftward lurch. There's a lot of argument that the infrastructure package that they desire and they've been working on is way too big. You have a new inflation index out this morning that says it's up 5%, and the cost of regular goods that people want during the summer is going up. So these are huge, those and the tax increases required to pay for kind of the wish list from the Democratic Party for a larger infrastructure package has met resistance from Republicans who argue it's too big, but also from Manchin, who both, is somewhat sympathetic to that argument, but also to the fact that it is not the best way to go about sound policymaking to do it in a partisan fashion. This year, kind of the earlier COVID rescue package being more of an exception, but I think what he's trying to do, which is laudable, is to try and restart more of a bipartisan process, thoughtful consideration to get to, regardless of topic, whether it's infrastructure, immigration, you name it. He's basically trying to get back to the best language comes when both parties have a reason and an incentive to compromise. So, that has been a difficult process. There are probably more things in the next month or two that are not moving forward than are. Stuff like police reform is a hopeful spot, but you have immigration doesn't seem to be moving forward. Gun reform talks between Senator Murphy and Senator Cornyn just broke off. So, it is up in the air as to what will move forward. The one thing is not, though, is whether or not the filibuster is going to stay. I think that has been firmly established with Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, and actually several other Democratic senators who have pointedly refused to say that they would support getting rid of that to point toward a more partisan process. But
so just let me nod in though, because I think that one of the implications that I want to squish is that somehow in the last 5 months of the Biden administration, partisan politics was miraculously invented. It's not as if Mitch McConnell was passionately committed to bipartisanship for the preceding 4 years or for his time as majority leader. So I mean, is there really a difference between the partisanship that we're seeing now versus earlier, or is it just that the party flipped?
I mean, I would argue that there is, because you didn't see Republicans when they controlled all the levers of government itching to ditch the filibuster just so that they could get whatever they want. But that basically is what a lot of progressive Democrats, activists, you name it, have been calling for since this administration started. So I think that's a meaningful difference. But you are correct that partisanship itself is absolutely not new, and that the party in power will generally try and seek whatever means are available to find its own ends.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to the states in a minute, but Dave, yes, I had a feeling.
Yeah, I would stipulate to my good friend, the gentleman on the right, that when Republicans did control all levers of government, they didn't do that. They did do other things, wave their arms around in other ways over the last couple of years. But as Jeff noted, and as I noted earlier, there is a calmer feeling here in the nation's capital. I don't think that stays around very long. It'll dovetail into more that we'll talk about, Brad, around what is in the art of the possible in our industry under a Biden White House and a unified Democratic government. But, and I'll say this multiple times going forward, everything will get turned upside down when the midterm election cycle begins in earnest in January, February, around that timeframe. And there could be some more very, very notable retirements. So we'll get into that too.
Well, we have some time between now and then. Let's pivot over to the states, Jeff. And I didn't want to forget that question, which is, where are the hot spots in the country right now that you're paying attention to?
Absolutely, and I think so. One of the consequences of less moving forward at the federal level is you're seeing states take a lot more active role, and particularly in the areas of technology and the areas where our members care a lot about. One of the things that you've seen is privacy legislation. Just this week, the Colorado Senate repassed a House measure that we still have some concerns about, but is likely headed to the governor's office. And that is going to be the newest comprehensive state data privacy law, along with Virginia's passed earlier in March. But, so states are increasingly taking steps, and they're filling the vacuum that the federal government is not, and they are doing so in a way that would have concern for our members. And one good example is, this was present in California and this was present in Colorado, is their language in these pieces of legislation establishing global privacy controls, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of a universal opt-out, which sounds like a great thing, except there are no guardrails established around that for what does that really mean? How does it really encompass the user's intent, or is it just a broad block of any useful and consensual use of data for advertising or for other purposes? So I think that's a really big concern, for one, as the states continue to move forward when the federal government doesn't. But the other interesting factor has been, if you look down to, so I will give Dave, it is Florida, Florida, Florida in this aspect. The Florida legislature, which is entirely controlled by Republicans, and they have a very popular Republican governor, they came very close to passing a data privacy law. And the hangup was that it was some Republicans against other Republicans arguing for increased litigation, for a private right of action. And, historically, aiding
So
the
hold
trial
on,
bar.
just to translate for the people who don't know, what is a private right of action?
So a private right of action allows private citizens to sue for violations of that particular law. So in this case, for any companies, large or small, that violated consumer rights as established within that law, rather than having state law enforcement be the enforcer, any citizen under any circumstances, if they feel that their rights were not respected, can file a lawsuit. And that has a real concern, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, that they could just get lawsuited out of business. We had a talk earlier this week with Representative Gus Bilirakis, who is the top Republican on the Committee of Jurisdiction in the House for privacy. And he put it really well. He said, look, I want companies to be hiring engineers, not lawyers. And I think that really puts the thumb on the level of concern for allowing those kind of lawsuits and incentivizing frivolous lawsuits rather than allowing law enforcement to deal with it. But to me, the interesting part was you've seen an increasing flavor from Republicans of just antipathy towards anything, quote unquote, big tech. And it's gotten to the point where some Republicans were willing to incentivize those kind of lawsuits where they wouldn't have in any other context. But if it's detrimental to big tech, they were willing to do that. And even though that privacy law didn't pass, the governor did prioritize and sign a law that allowed penalties, both from the government and private lawsuits, against social media platforms for the deplatforming of political candidates and other individuals. So, you're seeing some interesting turns in the larger politics, kind of as, a post previous presidency as a populist appeal has risen in prominence in the Republican Party. It's upsetting some of the usual kind of ideological alliances and principles. And it's a really interesting development to watch. It's not fully formed yet. It's still in progress.
Well, let's take what you just cited about deplatforming and let's pull on that string for a moment. Facebook's oversight board, we've been waiting for quite some time, finally earlier this month came out, and as Kara Swisher said on her Pivot podcast, kicked the can down the road for a couple of years and said that former President Trump is banned from Facebook until January 7th, 2022. Which is a 2-year term. It's significant because it means that may or may not expire after the midterm elections. So he wouldn't be able to resume his social media activities on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, although the Facebook Oversight Board only governs Facebook until after the election. But it's a really intriguing thing that's happened with the board. And what I'm curious, the Oversight Board of Facebook, what I'm curious about is, does that have any impact on the way that people in Washington, D.C. and in state houses all over the country are thinking about big tech, about a big tech breakup, about legislating big tech? The industry has been very pro self-regulation, please self-regulation in some regards, although when it comes to privacy, our stance in the industry has been please quickly regulate us on a federal level so that we don't have to play whack-a-mole with individual privacy legislation at every state and every municipality. So I mean, it's quite a complex thing. What I want to know is, does this action by Facebook or by Facebook's oversight board have any impact on the way your conversations in DC and in state houses are going? Mm-hmm. So Dave, let's go with you first.
Sure, I can. So many different directions to go here, Brad. And it would be interesting for people who are reading about the 2-year ban to ask themselves, and I do this myself as a Democrat, is this something that is good, helpful, and safe as applied to just Donald Trump, or if there is somebody that had the power of convening and the reach and loyalty to a message, would it be good for that person too? So it's always good to remove the person from an action like this, but it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, for most people to remove Donald Trump from thinking of this calculus. Facebook took an absolute unprecedented action in doing this, and plans to reinstate him, just to give the full picture, if, quote unquote, the risk to public safety has receded. How do you measure that? Who are the arbiters or the judge and jury on that statement if the risk to public safety is no longer there? It refers, Facebook did a blog post, they alluded specifically to the behavior of public figures during a period of heightened violence or unrest. So what does that mean? Obviously, this is a case of complete first impression. The Capitol was never really raided in this manner before. There were not the avenues on social media for people to communicate and coordinate. So it will be interesting to see when or if Facebook or any other platform considers doing this to another individual, or is this truly targeted just to Donald Trump? The fact that 70 million people voted for him, the fact that he still has an outsized, very loyal following, and that's the rifle shot that they were going for. Nick Clegg, who is one of their senior vice presidents, yes, said that any penalty that we choose to apply or choose not to apply will be controversial, and many will say that it wasn't appropriate for a private company to suspend an outgoing president. And of course people will say that, but this is America, anybody can say anything that they want. There will be many people who will say, you had to turn off the microphone after the Capitol riot. Believe it or don't believe that he had a huge role, whether he knew he did or he didn't, in stoking up the crowd to go raid the Capitol, not just during that rally that day, but in the weeks leading up to it. So Brad, it puts big companies, private companies, very successful ones who have really democratized and connected the world, into a position of, well, this new thing happened, this awful thing happened. What do we do about it? What is our responsibility? Did we have a role in this? We sure as heck didn't want to have a role. We never wanted this to happen. We allowed the Arab Spring to take place years ago, which helped citizens in the Middle East rise up against oppressive dictators. That's where we thought our platform and our connectivity was going and would be used. We never thought it would be used for violence in the seat of government in America. So it will be interesting to see if the oversight board's decision comes and goes in the month or months ahead without much pushback. And it will be interesting to see if the 45th president finds another avenue to get his message out that has a following. He has already said, Our
So
country
hold
can't
on,
take this
Dave.
abuse anymore.
Dave,
Please.
I think that's what you're saying is very eloquent. It is, however, not the questions I'm asking, which is the questions I'm asking is, as you're having conversations on the Hill, and Jeff, we will turn to you for what I suspect will be a counterpoint momentarily. As you're having conversations on the Hill, is Facebook's action or other actions that are similar? Google last week, announced it's making a change to its algorithm for known victims of certain kinds of harassment and extortion, in anticipation to get ahead of legislation or to control the narrative. What I want to know is, based on the oversight board and the action that has been taken, do you think that's changing the conversation in the legislature at the federal level right now? Are people like, oh well, Facebook's taking care of it, we don't have to worry about this anymore?
Democrats love that they did it. Republicans hate that they did it. There's a short answer to that. It is more grist for the mill of the sledgehammer to hit big tech from one side, not from another side. But Facebook, Democrats have plenty of criticisms about Facebook in other ways. This is and for other kind of messaging, and we can go into all of that separately. But in this action, I don't think there's a Democrat in Congress who would say Facebook made the wrong decision here. And I think many Republicans would say, you're stifling free speech, you're playing God with who you keep on the platform and who you don't. You can tell us that you're trying to do this in a impartial way as much as you want. We don't buy it. And the wheel keeps turning.
So Jeff, I suspect you might have something to say about this.
So I think Dave covered a lot of it really well. And I think his short statement is largely on point. I don't recall any particular names, but I do feel like I saw Democrats who said that it didn't go far enough, who just feel he shouldn't be allowed access back to the platform. So it is one of those decisions that didn't really make anyone happy. And I think people on the Hill, policymakers took out of it what they already thought. If you think that Donald Trump is a menace and that he shouldn't have that as a platform for whatever length, then I think that did that. If you're a Republican and you have concerns about speech, if you have concerns about the censoring of particular viewpoints, if you have concerns about how that standard is applied to a leader of the US versus other leaders around the world, what they heard was, this is just more evidence that there is a discrimination against either the former president or against people who think like that. And so the interesting thing to watch will be, how does that filter into what remedies are available? I think that was the point that you were trying to make. You do hear less noise about what should be done on Section 230 and what should that look like. The temperature of that has definitely gone down, but I think where the temperature has gone up is on antitrust. And I saw this morning that the House Antitrust Subcommittee Chairman is going to be putting out legislation soon, broken into several pieces that are going to take differing approaches to antitrust. And this is going to be aimed squarely at, big tech, Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon. And, Republicans and Democrats have traditionally wanted to punish big tech writ large. That's, like I talked about in Florida, that seems to be a consistent theme where the parties overlap, but there's still a significant difference in what they would like to do about it. You don't see any consensus on 230 reform. You don't yet see any consensus on antitrust reform, whether it's the two top leads in the Senate who can't agree, or the separate reports that were produced by Chairman Cicilline and by the top Republican, Ken Buck. So I think you still see a lot of angst against big tech and a desire to do something, but in the same way as the infrastructure talks, just because both parties like infrastructure generally, but can't seem to find a solution, I think you're seeing a similar thing in those areas. So to wrap a really long answer to your question, I think the Facebook decision fed people's original perceptions rather than change the needle in any meaningful way.
So let's wrap up because we're running out of time with 230. But I just do want to say I noticed that both of you took pains to not ever say the words Fifth Amendment. But when it comes to freedom of speech, the Fifth Amendment doesn't guarantee it only guarantees that government is not going to impugn or interfere with free speech, not that a platform that is not owned by the government, like Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or what have you, Snap, will. So I mean, that's sort of that's the only place where I was like, I don't know if free speech is necessarily the issue right there.
And this is obviously something that is going to be long, complicated, and developing. But the concern is that these platforms are the public square now. That because of their reach, because of the power and authority that they have, that all of the same speech rights that you are afforded, literally or figuratively, in the public square, are the ones that are available on the platforms. And what you hear from Republicans is, if you get shut out of that, you might theoretically have some option, but it is not meaningful. I mean, the interesting thing is you're kind of seeing that a little bit for the former president. While he has been locked out of social media, he still has significant influence within the party, but his ability to influence the news cycle and to basically get his message out there and be effective has been impacted. So I think that's the concern, Brad, is, there is nothing out there that says, internet online platforms are where speech happens. But I think the concern is that is where it's going as they continue to grow as they do.
So let's have the final question to Dave, and let's twin this to 230, Section 230, which was the cover story of the latest issue of Wired magazine, which was a relatively obscure thing from the late 90s until former President Trump really towards the end of 2020 started talking about it a great deal. What's happening with 230? Is there do you think there's enough will to power to do something about it in the next year?
Brad, I really don't. I really don't. It is a piece of the Communications Decency Act that discusses platform liability, and it became the phrase during the campaign cycle of last year with the president at rallies talking about how he could be censored, how his voters' voices could be censored, and on and on. And there are a number of proposals, most of them, if not all of them, that are partisan, that on dissenting views, and the recommendations of repealing Section 230. Some want to add comments about cancel culture. Some want to rope it into bipartisan big tech discussions, antitrust discussions. But right now, there is no real moving vehicle that looks like it will pass that alters platform liability. It is, when you look at the time that committees have to get their business done in a very short year leading up to an August recess, and an issue that is as charged as this one, I don't know if any of the smarties in the talking heads cohort here think that there is the political will nor the political muscle to weigh in on this. And President Biden, during the campaign, said that something must be done, it must be changed. I don't think that since then he has said anything about it. He's the president. It's his prerogative to do what he wants, pursue what he wants. He has not weighed in on this, nor really any other appreciable matter involving social media, privacy, technology generally, et cetera. To date, he has not appointed a new chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, nor a new chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, nor the Deputy Attorney General in charge of overseeing antitrust at the Department of Justice, which in my opinion, I think Jeff might share this, is the biggest gaping hole in his administration right now, because that person, when he or she is appointed, will be the driver of anything having to do with the antitrust growing, gathering tsunami storm around larger companies. Will the Department of Justice carry on the investigations that the Trump Department of Justice had begun? Will it put its thumb on the scale in any way? That is, I think, what the major companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, Twitter, that's where their eyes are right now. Privacy is not moving in the House nor the Senate. there are murmurs that it might be. Chairwoman Jan Schakowsky on the House Commerce Committee has said she wants to start a process to look at privacy reform. Section 230 bills, as you asked me, Brad, they are not moving. No hearings really scheduled. No legislative drafts being moved. So technology issues are the pinata. Everybody loves to hate big tech right now, defining it however you would like. Everybody takes the stick and whacks the pinata, but nothing really further than that in terms of actual pen to paper and movement through committees in Congress, nor the White House.
So let's just give Jeff a chance to rebut if there's something to rebut. I don't think there will be, but
no, I can end with a short bit of happy bipartisan harmony by saying I agree with Dave. I just think the one thing worth noting is the administration is engaging when it comes to countering China. You saw a new executive order this week that rescinded Trump's previous executive order trying to restrict activity from WeChat and TikTok in the US, and they've replaced that with something similar, but that's going to be longer and more thorough process before anything happens. But you couple that with the very large piece of legislation on manufacturing technology and research and development that the Senate just passed and the House could take up next. And I think the other flavor that you see is there is bipartisan interest in, if you say that it's countering China, you have Congress's attention.
So bipartisanship is possible, but unlikely in the short term. Dave Grimaldi and Jeff Murray, the two gentlemen who lead our policy efforts on the Hill, thank you so much for joining us today on IAB There. It's always a joy to talk with both of you.
Enjoyed it, Brad. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, IAB There to close out. Before we do that, we have a policy summit, which is happening on November 12th. It's part of our Brand Disruption Summit. To learn more, email me or Dave or Jeff or go to www.iab.com. Once again, Friday, November 12th is a full day devoted to these issues, how the industry is going to respond to and anticipate what's happening in Washington, D.C. and in state houses all over the country. IAB There is a production of the Interactive Advertising Bureau. Our show today was produced by Connor Healy, James Liddy, Joe Pilla, and Loretta Bain. I'm Brad Behrens. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.